How's it going, my how-to friends? My name is Gary, and this is my channel Weeks to Weeks. If you're a first-time viewer, I appreciate you clicking on the video and definitely consider subscribing. Today, we will be working on a bookshelf project. It's going to be a wall-mount bookshelf. I'm thinking around 36 inches in height, 18 inches in width, and around 2.5 to 3 inches in depth. Probably 3 tiers of shelving somewhere in there, right around 12 inches a piece, just to kind of keep things simplistic. Materials, this stuff is laying around in my garage currently. We're talking 2x4s, 1/4-inch plywood. This is specifically a composite board of some sort, but if you have to go out and purchase this stuff, it's going to be on the cheaper side of things. Tools, you're not going to need any special tools whatsoever. Potentially a table saw, but at a minimum, a circular saw, maybe a miter saw in the basic stuff, pen, pencil, a square to make sure you get your angles correct, a tape measure, and a drill and screws. So now that we have an idea of what is required, let's go ahead and get started. So I have things marked out. This piece is a little bit off dimension of what I'm looking for. So I have it fastened to my mobile workbench that I built, and I'm gonna use my circular saw in this case. You can use anything like a table saw, but this is gonna be the most simplistic thing and the thing that most people have laying around. So I have this board lengthwise marked out to 36 inches. We have our safety goggles here, and we're gonna rip this board down. First cut is made. Now we just need to make sure we have the width, the 18 inches. Excess is cut off. We'll set this to the side to save it for a future project. It's a good idea to use something, sandpaper, orbital sander, something along those lines to just kind of clean up the edges. If you're wondering about my old school Ryobi orbital sander, 18 volt. I recently fixed that up top for that how-to video. And again, size-wise, 36 inches in height, 18 inches in width. While it's no massive bookshelf by any means, it's perfect for the application that I'm building it for. It's going to be great for any nursery or a children's room for children's reading material. So now that we have the understanding of the size in this backboard piece, let's go ahead and build everything else that's going to attach to it. I'm going to bust out the table saw. I think it's going to be the best route to rip a 2x4 down to a measured length that I want to do for the depth of the shelf. I'm deciding to go with 2 3/4. Now, I won't go too much into detail why I normally don't like to bust this out. I think it's mainly because it's an older junk table saw, and while I won't give away too many details, I will say it rhymes with Shmyobi. And why I don't really like it is because it's a one fence system. The one fence that it has wiggles, moves about, so I have a junk 2x4 with C-clamps supporting that one fence, and on the opposite side, I have another junk board with more C-clamps to hopefully keep this board in check the entire time, so through and throughout it ends up at 2 3/4. So if anybody has a recommendation for a possible upgrade on a table saw, by all means drop a comment down below. Initially, my thought was to use the 2x4s that I ripped down to 2 3/4 for the sides, but I quickly realized this is way too stout, way too thick. I love 2x4s, they're cheap, very structurally sound. However, with a bookshelf this small, clearly you don't need something that thick. And if we do that size on both sides, it just really restricts the amount of space for the books. I think at this point I'll utilize it at the bottom, and then as you just saw, I ended up ripping a 1x6, so I split it in half. It's actually 5.5 inches it measures out, so ripping it down the center, 2 3/4 works out beautifully. So I got the sides which match this bottom piece, so it's now all that 2 3/4 depth. Now this piece right here was the remaining portion of that 2x4 that I cut off. So what I am proposing to do, once I lob off the excess, I believe I should have enough to utilize those as the shelves that I need. Well, once you have the books in here, you don't want them to fall forward. So I think I'll have this roughly 3 or so inches from the bottom. So you just set the books in here and they don't fall forward. What I ended up doing was cutting 18 inches off these side pieces. So what that lets me do is have them right about that length. Here is the excess off of that. These I need to cut down, but I will utilize these as my 2 shelves. And then going back to this 2x4 that I cut down, these are the excess pieces right here, 18 inches wide. I'll do them 3 inches up above the shelf. One more of these and have it up top here, and then do some form of a slow downgrade to here to kind of make it a little more aesthetically pleasing. So for screwing in this base 2x4 piece, I'm using a 1.25 inch screw. And I'll be fastening this in with 4 screws. I'm using some wood glue along with these screws. Now for these other thinner pieces, to attach those, I'm going to be using 3/4 inch screws and pre-drilling everything. Now it is great to use wood glue on projects like this. I would wait to glue this side panel to the bottom because you will want to remove that later on to paint. Side pieces, I'm going to be using a 2-inch screw. Three-quarter-inch screws I spaced out roughly 10 inches apart. We'll wipe out any excess glue from the inside here. It looks like I don't have any excess on the outside, but we'll wipe it down just in case. Same process on this opposite side. Again, just do yourself a favor and wait to glue that side piece on there. Now at this point, I'm setting in those shelves temporarily just to make sure everything is shored up while I run that bottom screw in. Now I'm going to remove those shelves, set the whole bookshelf upright so I can level out those shelves and permanently affix them. Shelf is secured upright via a C-clamp to my workbench here. I have a slight shim over here, keeping everything secure and level. Now that we know that the shelf is level at the bottom, we'll go ahead and secure this middle shelf. And obviously we want it to be as level as humanly possible. So we'll slide it in here. There is a little bit of tension and I'm waiting to secure these till I get this side of the shelf in place and perfectly level. It is marked, I believe, 12 inches from here to the bottom portion. So now we just need to make sure this thing is level after putting some wood glue in here, secure it, and fasten the screws. If you don't have them already, do yourself a favor, pick up a set of clamps just like the ones you see here. You can find them all over the place for relatively cheap, and it makes a world of difference whenever you're trying to secure these shelves. It's kind of more like an extra set of hands to fasten everything to keep it in place. Now I'm going to obsess over making sure this shelf is level because I am very OCD, and if this thing was off by any little bit, it would have drove me crazy. So here you can see me running those screws in, and again, pre-drilling before you fasten the screws in is key. Otherwise, you risk cracking the wood, and nothing sucks more than getting to this stage and breaking one of the side pieces and having to do it all over again. With the shelving now permanently level and affixed, I go on to this top section, which is left over from the original 6-foot 2x4. I pre-drill the side as well as the top sections. Now, I did not show it on camera, but I went back and I used a little bit bigger of a bit just so I was able to countersink in those holes and make sure these screws are perfectly flush with that backboard. With the shelf now back upright, here are the sections that I initially was going to use 3 inches above, but after messing around a little bit with some books, doing some testing, I realized the books can easily slide out the base, so I moved those all the way down to the base of each shelf. So I have 3 of them here. I'm attaching it with 2 screws apiece. It's going to be very sturdy, a little bit of wood filler. You'll never know that the screws were there holding them in place. Unfortunately, this lower section, it did break at that wood knot, but it's not the end of the world. Add a little bit of extra wood glue, some additional screws, and it's no big deal up until, whoops, that point where I broke it, but no big deal, some wood filler magic, and you never know it broke. Anywhere that we put screws, we countersunk them in and put some wood filler. I attached 3 of these pieces of 2x4 that are 18 inches long. I put them towards the bottom of the shelf. I realized I wanted to double down on these. Initially, I was only going to do 1 every so 3 or 4 inches up. But once I realized you set the books in here, if you only have the 1 stringer across, the books are likely to lean forward and actually fall out the bottom. So doubling down on those, so I'll have 1 right here. And you can see I already kind of pre-drilled holes for the other ones, but I'm going to wait to affix those until after I paint everything. But now that the wood filler is pretty much on here and dry, I have 1 section up here because this was kind of some scrap wood. It was a little boogered up here, so I added a little extra wood filler, waiting for that to fully dry to sand down, and then I'll be ready to paint the outside as well as those additional stringers. But for now, what I'm doing is painting this inside, and I thought about painting it the exact same color as the rest of it. However, I wanted to add some variation to it. I definitely thought about leaving the brown, but I like the idea of a gray, so this is what I'll be using. Some of this pebble gray that I picked up from, I believe, my local Home Depot. If you're wondering as far as wood filler, this is the stuff I use probably from Home Depot as well, but I've had for a number of years. Or I should say I've used that particular one for a number of years. Now, if you're going the staining route, I probably wouldn't use wood filler, and I would likely figure out a better way to secure everything so you don't have to mount it with screws from the outside and wood fill it to where you would notice it if you were to stain it. But because I'm going to paint the exterior as well, I'm not worried about using a little bit of wood filler. But now we're ready to tape off the inside of here. In hindsight, I probably would have waited to glue this frame to the actual bottom until after I painted it, but I'm kind of committed at this point, so now we're onto the tape. Otherwise, we'd be able to unfasten it and just get a small roller and bust this out. But because I did it this way, I'm gonna need some tape. The time lapse here is going to make it seem like this stage took not long at all, but unfortunately that is far from the truth. Just laying down the tape and removing it at the end was very time consuming, let alone painting everything, getting in every nook and cranny. There's far more efficient methods to do this. Quick update. This is the product after 2 coats of that gray. Before you remove the tape, run a razor blade across the edge of the seam here and then peel off the tape. Otherwise, you risk peeling up and you don't end up with as crisp of an edge. Mine aren't the best, but it could have been worse if I didn't run that razor blade across there. Now, I do have some brush strokes in here. You can definitely use a foam brush, potentially a roller, but if you do the roller out, then you'll want to make that back piece removable. So don't glue this like I did, and it's probably a 10-minute job, whereas I had to mask all this stuff off. But I prefer some brush strokes in here. It makes it look that much more handmade. I just need to mask this off reverse, so now I'm masking off this gray area so I can paint everything else. While I was busy painting the remainder of this project, I had a lot of time to reflect upon if I had to do something differently with this project, what exactly would I do? And it came down simply to one thing. If you look closely, the way the camera is angled, it is picking up this side panel perfectly. The 1-inch section right there where it meets the thicker 2x4 base, there is a seam as well as that top section. So there's 2 very noticeable seams from the side. If I had to do it over again, I would make that one continuous piece. At some point, well before I painted, I decided to pre-drill some holes. That way, once everything was painted, ready to go, almost finalized, I could hammer in these 1.5-inch masonry nails. Now these nails I didn't pick for any specific reason outside of I had them already laying around my garage, but I believe this is the perfect final touch to this bookshelf project. I think the overall final product turned out fantastic. I actually added a little extra decorative touch by adding in some nails to the outside. I think it kind of contrasts things between the gray and white a little bit better, sets it off a bit. But I think the best part about this project was the simple fact that it didn't cost me a single penny whatsoever. All this stuff, including the paint I had left over from random projects throughout the past year. Only thing left to do is find a spot to mount it, and of course, load it back up with books. But something like this, I think it's great. It's very universal. You can load it up with thicker books if you really wanted to. And the beauty about doing it yourself, you can obviously make it to your specific dimensions that you want. So clearly you can make this even bigger if you want. You can cut it down to 2 shelves. However you want to do it, space it out differently. It is very cheap to build. Only takes 3 different types of boards, plywood for the backing, some 1x6 boards that I cut in half for the sides, and a single 6-foot 2x4, which I stripped down to get these sections here, and I used a chunk of it on the bottom as well as the top. So if this video helped you out, be sure to give it a giant thumbs up. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop a comment down below, and consider subscribing because I'll have more projects like this coming up here in the future. So with that being said, I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you friends next time.